do the video, the three-way video.
We do. We're now live. Welcome to the Patriots Go for 7 podcast. I'm your host, Brandon DeFreitas, here with two of our premier and original owners, Alex and Krieger. How are you guys doing?
I'm excellent. Thankful to be on the podcast a second time this year. I'm also doing well after my exit from the league this year. It'll be interesting to sit back and watch you guys battle it out.
Well, we appreciate having both of you, and it's definitely fun doing this during the playoffs. We have a lot to discuss, especially with some of what last week happened. But before we get into the results last week, Alex, you could make a contention that if you had taken the kneel instead of Krieger, you would still be alive in the playoffs against me instead of Krieger advancing.
Yeah, we talked about it a lot. Both you and I, Brandon, went back and forth on taking a knee, and then all of a sudden we realized that Krieger could actually take the knee, and lo and behold, he does end up taking the knee. One of the things that I'll say is we'll discuss talking about making some sort of rule for it, but at the end of the day, it takes balls either way, and I think I ended up overthinking it where. I knew that the matchup was better against Tony, or I was going back and forth, and Jason's team has just been so consistently good. But I just couldn't live with myself if I made the wrong decision and lost because of kneeling. So I think I just kind of overthought it, where at the end of the day is, John just did what was best for his team, and it ended up working out. So kudos to him for that. Yeah, a lot of it kind of just comes down to momentum, I think, in fantasy. The way Jason's team was just every week producing versus Tony, even McCaffrey had kind of been, he had been great, but it's tough to sustain that kind of production. And I just feel like I just had a feeling that Tony might underperform a little bit going into last week. So I rolled the dice on it. Yeah, or at least that the odds of him underperforming were a lot higher than Jason's odds. Yeah, and it ended up working out that way. Part of the way I looked at it was just how good Jason's team was top to bottom, and the fact that even if guys get hurt or Devontae Parker getting banged up, he's got Deebo Samuel or DK Metcalf, and just the fact that Tony has all these guys who are I know T.Y. Hilton is banged up, and it's just so many guys that are dealing with injury problems. That's my situation. It's not a good, that's not a good team to roll out every week.
I know how you feel there with the injuries, Krieger, as well. And this really came to fruition as I'm looking at last week's results in your game against Tony. Like you mentioned, he started a bunch of guys who were fill-in players, like Jamison Crowder got 4.5 points. James Washington, 5.3, Jack Doyle, 3.7. And you do that along with Russell not being consistent, and he only got 9.6. And at the end of the day, Tony just didn't have the upside in his lineup, despite some of those premier players.
Yeah, and I think his team was also pretty running back heavy. And I thought, even though the Panthers were playing the Falcons have actually been pretty stingy on run defense. So I felt like McCaffrey probably wasn't going to have it wasn't more likely for any reason that he was going to have a huge game. And then Lindsey and Ingram both had decently tough matchups. So I just felt like his team was, I think his team's still good, but it just felt like the right timing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. We look over to your team, and it did just enough last week. We were watching the games, and a couple of pivotal moments happened when I think in a 3-minute span, Cole Beasley and Zach Pascal both caught touchdown passes and both converted 2-point plays. So that was 8 points for each player during that span and really pushed them into a good start status. So you had a couple things go right and ended up going ahead with an 11-point victory.
Yeah, I got kind of lucky at certain points. I benched Darius Slayton, which I know was questioned a little bit on the pod last week. It actually looked like a bad decision with the big night he had. But yeah, I just felt like I had a couple of good matchups. Obviously, I got there's a lot of luck involved in that. Tony and I were both making a bunch of pickups during the week and playing guys due to injury issues. And other than Robbie Anderson, Tony really didn't hit on anybody last week. So, it's kind of some luck. If you look at it this week, I don't have Beasley or Pascal in my lineup, with Beasley having kind of a tough matchup at Pittsburgh, and then Pascal with T.Y. Hilton potentially coming back and taking some targets. So, I'm kind of betting on maybe that was a 1 week of lightning, and maybe I get lucky at some other place this week. But yeah, definitely needed a few breaks to happen just to even get by Tony last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were talking about this last week. It was interesting how your trades with Tony came to fruition during this matchup, namely the fact that you acquired Rodgers and Freeman, and Rodgers and Freeman outscored Tony's top running back and top quarterback combined. So definitely a trade victory for you there. And Pascal was the replacement for T.Y. Hilton, who you had traded to Tony too. So I think that was one of your better trades all season.
Yeah, I was really the only one that, worked out, I would say. The Juju one kind of was I guess you could say a loss, but for the most part, kind of a wash, because I don't think anybody from that trade really matters. And then, the Mahomes deal is, I call it a loss, but, I wouldn't say Mahomes is, I'd feel great about playing anyway versus Rodgers. So it's the one deal I needed to make to win at least one playoff game. So it certainly was pivotal for me.
Oh, absolutely. Now, Alex, we'll flip over to your game. This was a little bit higher scoring. Jason took the 139 to 117 victory. Again, I'm not trying to rub salt in the wounds, but 117 would have beaten either team in the other matchup. This is just a matter of, as Krieger alluded to, Jason's team puts up 139 on a week where Baker Mayfield only puts up 9 points for him. And I believe Devontae Parker got out of the game with an injury, a concussion. So Jason's team is scary, consistent, and explosive.
Yeah, really, that's exactly what we were worried about with Jason's team. Ended up working out this week. I did want to circle back to the Tony John matchup real quick. The one thing I wanted to add to that was, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback here, but as I was watching those 1 o'clock games, I saw the Jared Cook early touchdowns, and I was like, "Holy crap!" And I texted Tony, and then I checked his lineup, and I was like, "Oh my God, he didn't end up playing him." And to Tony's defense, he said all the experts. Obviously we're not quite experts here, but we've been playing for a while. But all the guys who are on NFL Network get paid to analyze these matchups, which actually had Jack Doyle higher than him in the rankings. But I think this is a case here where you just got to play your more explosive guys, even when the matchup isn't quite there. I don't think anyone thought that 49ers game was going to end up being as high scoring as it was. But still, that to have a guy with Jared Cook's potential, and then you put him on the bench for someone who I think his upside is a lot less than Jack Doyle, and it ended up costing Tony.
It did. That's around looks like it's like a 15-point differential. Would have made the difference for the game. Of course, a tough game to play when you can look at, as Krieger mentioned earlier, Darius Slayton on his bench. So, some of these lineup decisions are tough. And to your point in the playoffs, I do like playing my studs in any time possible, or at least the higher upside players, because you're going up against good teams.
Yep. Yeah, Slayton obviously would have made the difference back, like you said. But I think just the fact that Tony picked up Doyle off of the waiver wire fodder, and puts him in the lineup, I think that hurts a little bit more, than Slayton, who had the return of Shepard, and then Tate was also there, and it was Eli. So you can't really blame
bad weather game too. So it's tough to make that call on a Sunday, and he's playing Monday night. It could be like torrential. I don't know the weather, but
right. I remember I texted our Slack chat earlier in the week, and I said to you, Krieger, I was like, I don't know if I'd play Slayton with Eli. Just historically, Eli checks it down, and Slayton had been more of a deep threat, but Eli came out firing in that game. It was completely unexpected.
Yeah, he really wanted to get a lifetime over 500. So it was an interesting game. I watched most of the game. It was a good one.
Yeah, it definitely was. All right, well, Alex, we'll go back to your painful loss here.
Yep.
And on your side of the coin, I think we talked about it heading into the game. Your quarterback position wasn't lined up for success on the two matchups. Josh Allen was playing a tough matchup at home against Baltimore. Kyler Murray played Pittsburgh. And it turns out that they both struggled. Josh Allen with 12.7 and Kyler Murray 10.9. I think at the end of the day, that position really limited your upside on the week.
Yeah, definitely. And I was able to kind of play the matchups with them through the course of the season. But, at the end of the day, we'll see how Kyler Murray is next year. But I think being a rookie and then Josh Allen, not being able to put up too many passing yards and passing touchdowns, they're kind of limited in these tough matchups that, it's going to be tough for them to overcome the bad matchup. And that's what ended up happening. But, like you mentioned on the flip side, Jason's team has struggled with quarterback play all year long, and he ruled out the guy who got 10 points less than Baker Mayfield instead of Goff. So I think we really need to look elsewhere with what went wrong, this week for me. But I think just looking at Jason's team, one of the biggest things that has impressed me is the way he was able to draft, and he ended up picking up a top 5 back in Austin Eckler, and not only did he pick up Eckler, who's been a stud, but he also ended up getting Melvin Gordon pretty late, or in the mid rounds of the draft. And one of the things that I didn't really see happening was those have been two serviceable guys. I mean, Eckler's a top 5 back, and Gordon right now is a very, very good, flex play, if not a solid RB2. So I really thought eventually the Chargers would have this dud week and it'd only get in the teens or even 20 points with them both combined, but they've been at 30 plus combined points like almost every week. So, it's been really impressive to watch the draft results of Jason and some of the things he's been able to do this year.
Oh, completely agreed. And he's been really consistent. And to be honest, Henry was a player I mostly had off my draft board. I thought what happened at the end of the season last year was more of an anomaly because the entire season before that, he was getting touches, but he really wasn't doing much on the ground. But it turns out Tennessee really did figure something out with him. And he's been a real savvy pick for Jason. He must have been like a 3rd-round pick, and he's a top 3 running back. And I know Krieger mentioned going into this matchup, he'd rather play against McCaffrey than Henry at this point.
I certainly would. I mean, I don't know. He's really scary at this point. I think McCaffrey's been, you look at some of these weeks when he has 60 rushing yards and no touchdowns, and he still has, 25 points. That's ridiculous. But it just seems like Derrick Henry at this point is like 200 yards and at least 1 touchdown is almost like, I don't know. It feels like almost like a floor at this point for him. So he's the one guy in fantasy, I guess, other than Lamar Jackson at this point, unfortunately, who I'm dealing with that I wouldn't want to face.
Yeah, I mean, especially Tennessee gets in the red zone and Henry's a tank to take down. I always see him convert those short touchdowns.
And it's funny, too, how they use Dion Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
You see it the past few weeks that how many touchdowns Henry has gotten, and then his floor. He's gotten 22 points at least the past 5 weeks. Then he had a 6 the week before that, and 17. So was that 6 out of the past 7 weeks? He's getting 17 plus fantasy points, and he's in the 20s for 5 of those. So yeah. It's pretty amazing.
The other tough break I'm seeing here for your team, Alex, is the fact that the Chargers were playing against Jacksonville last week. And Jacksonville is, I think it's the one team in the league that's completely thrown up the white flag. They're just getting destroyed in every matchup right now. So kind of tough that his 2 backs played against what currently is one of the weaker defenses, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was tough because before those 4:00 games started, it looked like, I had a little bit of the edge after the 1:00 game. Yeah. So, but I was also looking at it like, man, if I started Mostert, then I thought I was gonna definitely win the week. But as it push comes to shove, that didn't actually matter. So a little bittersweet there that, I didn't make I couldn't have made a roster change to win the week. But yeah, like we said, just the Eckler and Gordon combination, I think was really the difference in this game for this week.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew Henry was gonna get 20 plus points, and he ended up doing it. But I didn't really see this, 36 combined points from Eckler and Gord.
Mm-hmm. You guys have anything more you want to touch on the prior week matchups, or you want to jump into the preview for this week?
I'm good to roll forward.
All right. Well, we'll start off, Krieger, with my game versus yours. It's not as much a preview as we would have expected because we had that Thursday night performance, and Lamar Jackson popped for 47 points. Mark Andrews ended up catching a touchdown, and he ends up with a solid 13.2. I think the only thing I will point out from this game, which was a saving grace for you, is Lamar missed Andrews for what would have been, I think, like a 70-yard touchdown. He was wide open down the seam, and that would have ended it right there. As we stand right now, like I'm not pretending I don't have an advantage or anything, but I do have a few weak flex plays I've been forced into because of injuries to Mike Evans and Rashad Penny. So, I mean, there is a low floor for some of the players I'm playing. And if you can get some consistency through your roster and pile up some touchdowns, I think there's a way for you to come back in this.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously the missed touchdown. I also got a little bit of luck with or it looked like some luck with the extremely late penalty. I don't think I've ever seen a penalty called that late, where literally the guys are on the sideline and the team's ready to kick the extra point, and then a flag comes in, and it's like, I mean, other than like a 15-yard like after the play penalty, I don't think I've ever seen a flag that late. But
I haven't either.
But so obviously, so they take down the Andrews Jackson touchdown, and then they run another play, and then they get it back, 2 plays later or whatever. Yeah. So it's like it's kind of a little bit devastating for me watching the game. But but yeah, it went pretty much almost as poorly as it could go for me. I think you're right about your team having some weak flex plays. I just think my team doesn't have the firepower overall to make it work. Thielen, I guess maybe he comes back and has a huge week, but I wouldn't really expect that. And then also Shark going down and potentially being out for the season is kind of not that he was great the last few weeks, but he did have the potential of having that 80-yard touchdown to go with a solid all-around game, and get you 20, 30 points. And then, maybe I kind of shot my wad a little bit last week with Slayton getting 2 touchdowns. So it's just a tough uphill battle. And the fact that, looking at my lineup, I feel like I need guys who could maybe get in the end zone a couple of times. And I feel like as much as I don't want to play 3 running backs, I just don't see Beasley or Pascal having a ton of upside this week. So I have to play Rojo and Freeman, which I don't really want to do. So it's a tough situation.
Mm-hmm. I do think you make a good point about Zach Pascal. The tough thing was the T.Y. Hilton return adds a little bit of a wrench into it. So you don't know if he is going to return. And the weird thing is, even if he doesn't return, that could mean Zach Pascal gets all of Marshawn Lattimore in that New Orleans secondary. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I'd rather have T.Y. back or not, to be honest, for that matchup as a Pascal owner.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I mean, I guess Thielen is for sure going to, that's my understanding, is for sure going to play. I'll have to check back in. But so it looks like it is nice having Pascal in the 8:30 Monday game to have a guy you can throw in there at any point during the week. But yeah, I do not like Beasley at all in the Pittsburgh matchup, although he has been a red zone guy for them. I can't see him getting over 100 yards in that game. So he's a no. And then Pascal, he had a huge week last week, but I don't trust him. I don't trust him. Even as much as the Bucs running back situation is scary, at least the fact that Evans is out, there might be some touchdowns to go around there is kind of what I'm praying for in that game. So that's kind of my logic with my lineup this week.
That definitely makes sense. And I was going to highlight the 2 players I thought, if you do have big double touchdown, like big performance upside, I think Rojo's one of those guys because Detroit's been so weak against the run. And like you said, in the red zone now, Mike Evans is one of the highest red zone targeted players in the league. They could turn more to the running game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel great about it, but I just feel like it's the highest upside play I have.
Mm-hmm. I do also like Kenny Golladay sitting there against Tampa Bay's secondary. It's been a couple years now that Tampa Bay's just had. I mean, they've tried to draft to solve the problem, but they haven't quite hit on any of those impact players in the secondary. That's an exploitable matchup for Golladay, and we've seen David Blah be able to hit him during the Thanksgiving game. So that would be another player. I think if you're looking for a real upside play, he's one of the players you got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, tough year. He did get, I will say, the Matt Stafford garbage time touchdowns have continued even without Matty Stafford. I got one to Golladay the other week, so I 20-0 with like a minute left, and he's getting a touchdown. So that was kind of nice to see. But yeah, I mean, obviously with the third string quarterback, even against the Bucs, the upside is still a little bit limited. But there's no. I will say Marvin Jones was getting a big target share in the red zone.
Yep.
And Golladay was more like the possession guy between the 20s, and then also the big play guy. So, maybe and I think Hawkinson is also out. So, maybe if they score big, they also look to him in the red zone, and that helps me a little bit. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you there. Switching over to my side of the field, I think you mentioned it last week or going into it when you were making your decision to take a kneel or not, that my team compared to John B's, even with Mike Evans, I was a little top heavy. Now without Mike Evans, I lose one of those top tier players, and I'm even more so top heavy. I mean, I have a lot of reliance, and obviously a hit this week with Lamar, but you look at the rest of the players I have to go, and Chris Carson and Tyreek Hill, I have a good amount of confidence in. Carson's got a great matchup against Carolina's run defense, and Tyreek Hill could just go off any week. But after that, I mean, Miles Sanders, Curtis Samuel, Connor, and Boston Scott, I'm still not confident in any of those options. I just think it's better than what's out there on free agency and on my bench. So that's why they're in there.
Yeah.
But I don't feel great about it.
Samuel's tough. I think you have to roll with him based on what you have, but obviously, Kyle Allen has really struggled the last few weeks, and it just looks like the offense isn't what it was, and that kind of plays into my McCaffrey thinking of how valuable can a guy really be if he's on an offense that's absolutely putrid.
Yeah.
So, but I think you have to play him, and then, it's a tough situation, but obviously, we've seen it before. If you, like Alex winning the league with LT the first year, if you have a guy who can just go out there and clearly is the MVP of the league, maybe it doesn't even matter. But against a team like B, it certainly looks like you have a huge advantage. But against a really quality team with Derrick Henry or Zeke Elliott, and maybe just having a few guys isn't enough. It'll be interesting to see in the finals if it does play out that way.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to the fact that I think the winner of the other matchup we're going to go over is going to be the stronger team when we get to the finals, regardless of who advances from me or you. And you and I are looking to just do it on a few good pieces. Both of us have had the injury bug hit pretty hard. And, especially you, Carson Wentz isn't hurt, but his entire offense is out, and that limits his upside.
Yep. Yeah. My team is, you just kind of go down the list of guys, and they're either hurt or their quarterback's hurt or something's, their receivers are injured. There's just not a lot of places to go, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I got a little input here for you guys have gone through the matchups pretty good. But the one thing I wanted to point out that I think is going to play out really big in this matchup, and it might be the decision between who wins or not, is going to be your guys' first round picks. I think you look at a guy for you, John, like Kamara, who was actually number 2 on my board. I had him as the second running back, actually ahead of McCaffrey. So if I had the number 2 pick, I was going to pick Kamara as well. And he's been a guy that, besides a 32-point week in week 3, has really not put up what we expected. He's sitting there at the 12th ranked running back, but I think if you take away that 32-point week or put it back down to earth, he's probably in the 20s. And just from a guy who lost Mark Ingram, and we really looked at that, and that's why he jumped up on my board. But then the play of Latavius Murray, who has honestly kind of been a stud every time he touches the ball, he's making guys miss, and he's showing a lot of power. So just the scrimmage yards haven't been there for Kamara. But I think if you're going to pull this out, you're going to need him to be that, number 2 overall pick, that high first round pick that you drafted him to be. And I think it's kind of about time. We'll see how it plays out. But, I think that's really gonna be a guy who you need to go off. And on your side, Brandon, I think you look at James Conner, and he's obviously had the injury bug, but if you can get in the high teens or get 20 points out of Conner, I think you're going to end up pulling it out. So between those 2 first-round picks, it'll be interesting to see how those guys perform.
Yeah, definitely. And I know for me on the Conner side, actually was not a player I was intending on playing in the playoff matchup. I was going to play Rashad Penny over him. Carolina's got a really weak run defense, and I was going to roll out both Seattle backs. But with Penny out and Mike Evans out, I'm starting Boston Scott and Curtis Samuel. So I'm like, well, you know what? It's risky. Conner might, I know it was a report this morning, he might be in a more of a three-headed monster committee. But for me, Pittsburgh needs a win bad. And if they're going to be going for a win, I think they're going to be playing Conner at least on the goal line and in key third downs. So I'm hoping that he gets just enough, but I'm certainly not confident in the start.
Yeah, I think you got to roll him out there. It's just I just think the bench situation is so tough this week for you with the injuries and everything. So I think you had I definitely would roll him out as my RB2 if I were you this week, or at least if I was going to play Sanders, at RB2, I'd put him at flex, no question. As for Kamara, just watching the game quite a bit last week, there was like 2 or 3 times when he got a pass, maybe a yard or 2 behind the line of scrimmage, and had one guy to make miss, and he couldn't do it. And to me, that, I don't know, he just doesn't look like the same guy this year. I remember last year rooting for the Saints to beat the Rams in the NFC Championship game, just because I felt like they were a little bit of an easier opponent without, Aaron Donald and all the guys the Rams have. But watching the game, I was like, man, this guy's better than Todd Gurley, like a lot better. And I was just thinking, like, how the hell are the Patriots going to stop this guy? And obviously, you see in the Super Bowl, they easily stopped Gurley, and who knows what would have happened if they had to go against Kamara. But just looking at what he did last week, he didn't look right. And I've always been a Latavius Murray fan. I don't know what the heck happened in Oakland, but I agree. He's been the better back this year for them.
I think this is an interesting point with Alvin Kamara, too. And I see it with Saquon Barkley as well. I don't think either player is 100% healthy, and I think it's making a difference in their play. Both of them had some degree of a high ankle sprain at some point this season, and neither player quite has been playing at the level we saw last year. So I'm expecting, and not to show a hand for next year's draft or anything, I kind of think both players, as they get healthy next year, are going to return to the form we saw before.
Yeah, I think Kamara, you feel pretty good about just because his role in the offense and the fact that he, even if he's kind of banged up, he can still operate like a James White type and grind out some catches and points. I think at least Barkley showed last week watching the game. Like I think he had a short pass for a touchdown where he made a guy miss. Like he still looks good, maybe not as good as he could be, but I would feel pretty good rolling with him. Even with kind of his struggles this year, if I had to play him in fantasy this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last thing we'll go over in this matchup is kind of my bench position. I had some options, and I'll just throw out my rationale, kind of like you did, Krieger, for why I'm not playing them. One option is Prashad Perriman. He's got a good matchup against Detroit, but it's twofold here. Number one, Bruce Arians is a bit of a fickle coach. I'm not quite sure how to project who's going to be getting the majority of snaps in Mike Evans' absence. I think it's Perriman because Arians often goes with the veteran option, and Perriman had the more routes run and snaps after Evans left last week. But that could have just been like an on-the-run thing where a veteran's more prepared to take it, and maybe with a week of practice, Justin Watson and Scotty Miller get more playing time. So I just thought it was too risky to throw out Perriman in a playoff matchup. combined with the fact that Jameis Winston was throwing tennis balls on Thursday before progressing to footballs on Friday. So I'm not sure Jameis is really going to be 100%. And those items I just labeled Perriman as a little too risky for me to roll out there. I have Marcus Johnson on the bench, the number 2 receiver for Indy. Number 3, if Hilton comes back. I only picked him up this morning in case James Conner gets ruled out in the Sunday 8:20 game. I needed an option to at least have a playable player to throw in the flex. So that's the only reason I have Johnson. And then Anthony Miller, who I do like and wanted to play at the 1 p.m. game. But that game in Green Bay is going to be right around 10 degrees and feeling like 8 degrees. And I think we've seen in the past that once it gets that cold, the passing games really do suffer. So I'm not going to go with a number 2 option for Mitchell Trubisky in a game that's under 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, I could completely agree with you. I would definitely not have played Perriman. And then, I think Anthony Miller is the one guy that you maybe think about playing. I wasn't that high on him until last week happened. And, the kind of the Roto World line worked out where he had a big game. But yeah, I agree. I probably wouldn't play him either.
And I guess the one guy I'm playing over all of these is Boston Scott. He looked really good in that game we mentioned earlier last week, the Giants-Philadelphia game. And I know Doug Peterson likes using a committee, so I think it's going to be Sanders and Scott. And again, I don't really know how to project that. Scott looked like the better player or the more explosive player last week. So what if I roll out Sanders and Scott gets more carries? I kind of think I'll play both. I'll get whatever production they have in that backfield against Washington, and I'll hope they both have enough touches to, catch enough passes, or maybe one gets in the end zone.
Yeah, no, hard to disagree. Yeah, it's just tough to trust Mitch Trubisky doing anything offensively.
Yeah, seriously,
I mean that's a tough one. I know he's been good, but stat wise, but that's tough to do.
It's interesting that you're rolling out two running backs of the same team, Brandon, because you look ahead at the Jason matchup, the Jason team that we'll go over soon, but it's just amazing that the difference in quality, but you're sitting there with the big leads. So, I think going with the conservative route makes sense here, but it's just, comparing Eckler and Gordon, and then you look over on this other side and you're rolling out a rookie and a guy that honestly I really didn't know too much about before you put him in your lineup in Boston Scott. So it's kind of cool to see the 2 running backs of the same team, and we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point where, if I was in let's say Lamar put up a subpar effort or 15 points or even 20 points, and I felt like I needed to really outscore Krieger today, I'd probably throw it a wide receiver. It's just that wide receivers, especially the options I have that are all second options in their offense, are so hit and miss, and I think they're more likely to goose egg. And at this point, I just need players who aren't going to goose egg and really give Krieger a great chance to come back.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the other matchup. I think we covered this one pretty well in depth. I'm having some trouble oh, here we go. The NFL.com. You got to love the functionality here. We're looking at John B versus Jason. Current projection as John B with a 126-117 win. You guys have any preference of what side of this matchup we cover first?
Nope.
All right.
None here.
All right. We'll go on to Jason's side, and I think we'll have just a discussion to start about his quarterback situation. He has Baker Mayfield, who's going to go play at Arizona. Definitely a good matchup for Baker. And then his other option is Jared Goff going to Dallas. Goff, I think the last couple of weeks has outperformed Baker, but Jason's definitely leaning on the side of the matchup here. I guess either or, I'm not in love with starting. I can understand going Baker, but I will say I think the Rams have started to figure something out a little bit now as they start to use Todd Gurley more and go to the play action pass. I might consider Jared Goff. I don't think Dallas is really an opposing matchup at all.
I certainly can't say I'm on board with going with Baker Mayfield here. At the time I took the knee, I was actually a little bit scared of Mayfield's matchup in week 14, so that kind of played into my thinking. But I just think you got to go with the guy who's been better all season. The matchup is still okay. This is one thing that I wonder if Jason's team will die on this hill of I don't know. It just seems like a bizarre play to me.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what are your opinions on it?
So you mentioned going with the better guy. What's interesting here, John, is Goff is ranked 18 and then Baker is actually 19. So, they both kind of suck as far as a QB1, but they're right there neck and neck. I do think that the big difference that I see between the two is if you look at Goff, and we talked about this in a previous episode, he has 4 fantasy weeks where he has less than 5 points. And that's pretty amazing, when you think that's close to 25. Yeah, that is like 20. A 1 out of 4 chance your quarterback is going to get you 5 or less points. That's really going to put you under. And Baker has a few. He has one that was -4, and then I think a few that are right around 8 or 9 points. But when you're sitting there with the consistency that Jason has, I can actually see him going with Baker, and that it is a slightly better matchup, and he just wants to be a little bit more conservative in who he plays out. And he knows, hey, at least if my quarterback gets 10 points, I'm going to be up, 120 plus points. So I can kind of see him going with it with the Baker. I think I'd probably roll out with Baker if I was in his shoes.
I think
fair. I just think Odell Beckham being so kind of just bad this year, I think Mayfield's upside is kind of limited, but
I think what's interesting, Alex, is you pointed out the 4 matchups where Goff has scored under 5 fantasy points. If you look at the matchups, though, it was fairly predictable. It seems like he does this in tough matchups. The opponents in those games were San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Baltimore. These are 4 of the better, defenses in the league. And I think that's part of the reason is Goff struggles in good matchups, especially when it's away from home, too. I guess I'm not really afraid of Dallas, and I'm more afraid of Baker Mayfield. Other than getting a dump off screen pass for a touchdown, I just think it's more likely to be a Kareem Hunt run or a Nick Chubb run for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't really look too much at the matchups with Goff. I was just more Googling the point performances there. So you guys make a good point. It's a tough for him. That's what I don't really. I don't feel. What I'm trying to say is I don't envy Jason's spot here and having to pick between the 2 quarterbacks, and it's really tough. So it'll be interesting to play Monday morning quarterback and see which one ends up outperforming the other.
Agreed.
I actually, and I partially did this to block Jason. I carried for most of the week Ryan Fitzpatrick and Eli Manning and dropped Manning.
I've got something interesting to add on this one.
I dropped Eli Manning on Saturday to make sure that he wouldn't be available for Jason. I would have started either of those players. Eli plays against Miami, and Ryan Fitzpatrick plays against. I'm looking at against the Giants this week. He could have rolled out a Fitzpatrick Parker stack, which would have been pretty dangerous. I just feel like Jason has had multiple opportunities to pick up better quarterbacks, including this week, and he just hasn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a tough one. I probably would have stood pat if I were Jason. My interesting point off that is I was considering picking up Eli Manning and starting him this week. Just because of the matchup. And I think Eli really likes he's obviously been watching the team play without him, and I think he knows what they have. I think Slayton maybe is a stud in the making.
Yeah.
It looks like I don't think Ingram's going to play this week, but they do have obviously Tate looks like still a good player, solid possession guy who can break tackles and make tough catches, and then a pretty good third receiver too there. So they have some weapons. The thing that kind of swayed me against it was just the fact that for so many years, Manning just hasn't been good in fantasy.
Yeah.
He just never has been a fit. Like the stats have never come with him, even when he's had good players. So I just kind of going on the balance of his career, I decided against it. But I was seriously considering.
Mm-hmm. And, all cards on the table. Part of the reason I added Manning on that day was to potentially remove the decision from your team as well. I thought you might be peering over there. And I was like, I'm just going to hold Fitzpatrick and Manning. Maybe I'll cut them Saturday. And now I'm holding on.
Shrewd move, yeah.
Now I'm holding on to Fitzpatrick because if I advance, I don't want him as an option for Jason because Fitzpatrick plays Cincinnati next week.
Yeah, yep.
But I think, we spent a lot of time talking about Jason's quarterback because the rest of his team is rock solid. I mean, it's really his only weakness. At tight end, he has Tyler Higbee, who in Gerald Everett's absence has been performing really well. And really the only decision he has left is what to do with his second flex. And he's going with Deebo Samuel at home against Atlanta over Devontae Parker playing the Giants. I mean, I know it's nitpicking, but I would go Parker. Parker's been a really good player this year. Actually just got rewarded with a new contract with the Dolphins too. So, they believe in him. And he's been cleared from the concussion protocol, but that's not to say anything about Samuel. Samuel's been real solid this year too. So I think he has some really good flex options I wish I picked up because both of them were available late, but that's really his one decision this week is Samuel Parker.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still kicking myself for not picking up, especially Deebo Samuel. For me, I just think with what the Niners have cooking with Shanahan and their offense, I don't know if I can get a guy who's a big part of that offense in the game. I want to play him, and Samuel's just been so consistent that I'd have to play him at this point. Even though I think Parker is talented, and the Fitzpatrick does want to go to him. I just think I'd go Samuel.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Looking up his stats, he's got between 12 and 17 fantasy points the past 5 weeks. So very steady. And I think when you're in a position with Jason, probably has the most consistent best team. He's just rolling out some of his conservative plays this week. We'll see if it ends up biting him. I think, like you guys mentioned, between the quarterback and then I didn't actually know he wasn't playing Parker. You might look at it and say, he ends up going down this week because he started the wrong quarterback and then didn't play his higher upside guy in Devontae Parker. So that's a very interesting play by him. I don't envy his position, and I'm not sure which route I would go here. But I think he's definitely sitting down his higher upside guys in Goff and Parker.
He is. I agree with that. To Krieger's point, we look at Deebo Samuel. He has double-digit points in the last 5 games, and then he has it in the last 6 of 7 games as well. So he is a consistent option for Jason rolling out there. So I guess we'll flip over to the John B side of the coin. It's interesting. I don't think there's a lot to talk about for John B's side because I look at his bench and I'll list off some players on the bench. Dak Prescott, Dallas Goedert, Mike Boone, Alexander Madison, who's out, Tony Pollard in a defense. John B doesn't have playable options on his bench. It's really just what quarterback he wants to roll out there, and the rest of it is plug and play for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is obviously the Edelman injury popped up, so that's kind of a tough thing for him. He doesn't really have a great option to plug in there. He kind of just has to go with Edelman if he's active. But the quarterback decision making, I always thought was going to be kind of interesting for him. Even though you could say he won the deal with me, I personally think it is kind of a tough decision on where he goes at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got to roll with Mahomes, especially after doing that trade. And, so John we don't have the John Bowl going on, Krieger, if you end up pulling it out and John B does, I think that was one of the biggest storylines after that trade went down. Where we're like, well, if they end up playing each other, it's going to be really interesting to see, the quarterback tight end between your guys swap. And now obviously you have Rodgers, who I think you're leaning on a little bit more than Wentz. So we probably wouldn't get that same exact comparison, but this is the week that we'll see if that trade really comes out. I mean, John B got the bye. He put himself in this position, and now he's rolling out Pat Mahomes. He got him specifically for this time of the year and to help him win a championship. So I'm going to be pretty much looking at that, Mahomes versus Dak Prescott or even Carson Wentz and see if John ended up trading for the best guy there.
Yeah, and I don't know if this has ever been mentioned on it, because I just like the way Dak's playing right now, the way their offense works. I don't know. I maybe would lean more on Dak personally, but the interesting backstory on that trade is John B actually went to me and said, "Would you do Prescott instead of Wentz?" And my preference at the time was Wentz. So I think I said, "Yeah, I'd think about it, but I'd want to wait the weekend to do it." And so John B, I don't know what John B's preference was between Wentz and Prescott, but he just went ahead and did the deal with me. So kind of a unfortunate decision by me to go Wentz over Prescott at the time. I don't know if Dak could have been part of the deal if things went differently, but kind of a unknown. I don't know if that's ever been brought up, but one of the unknown storylines potentially.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that. And you have to remember, too, back when the trade went down, it seemed like Deshaun Jackson was going to return at some point this season. Obviously, now you have Alshon Jeffrey, who's also out for the year. So I think there was more hope that this Eagles offense would return and you'd get those 3 receivers with Nelson Aguilar, too. You have the 2 tight ends, and then, Miles Sanders is an explosive back out of the backfield. And you thought, wow, I think, Wentz with these playoff matchups against the Giants, Washington and Dallas, it looked really good at that time, where until now we have context and that offense just really doesn't look good.
Not at all. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned going with Prescott. That was one of the Achilles heel of John B's team all year that we were talking about is these stacked teams, the Kevin Lees with the Rams, of what was it last year, and teams in the past that relied too much on one team. It ends up being a weak spot if that team, underperforms. So, and you look at a guy like Pat Mahomes, and he hasn't been the same this year, but, he was a league winner last year. So would you really consider him going with the triple Cowboy stack here?
I would. I don't know. I just think Zeke Elliott gets points so many different ways. So it's almost like I would almost regard him as like, obviously he hasn't had the same year as like the McCaffreys or the Derrick Henrys, but I kind of just regard him as like he's getting his points, whatever. And then you just hope that Cooper and Dak connect on a touchdown. I think that the odds are still in your favor there. And I mean, if you're going to have to beat a good team, you're going to have to put up probably some points. So I don't, as good as John B is, he still has to put up points every week.
I do like the matchup that, the Cowboys are home and they really have a lot to prove there. And conversely, Pat Mahomes is going against a pretty stingy Denver defense. There's just so many storylines in some of these matchups with trades and with playing Monday morning quarterback that is going to be really, really interesting as these games unfold.
Oh, no doubt about that. I'm looking at the inactives to see what Julian Edelman's status is. He's actually active for today's game against the Bengals, but he is by all accounts banged up. So I think it'll be interesting if they can get a big lead against the Bengals. Do they pull Edelman out a little bit early?
Yeah, as bad as the Bengals have been, with the way the Patriots offense is going the last few weeks, maybe that's a little optimistic. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they need Edelman.
Yeah, they probably do. The other interesting player that hasn't looked the same was Amari Cooper. In that game last week against the Bears, Cooper had done absolutely nothing until the game was out of hand and Cooper got a last-minute touchdown. I think that could hurt John B. I removed him from my draft board going into the season. I'm not trying to be right about anything, but I was concerned he had a nagging injury, and he's had this nagging injuries all season. I'm not sure if it's finally catching up to him, because when I was watching him last week, he didn't look like the same player that he looked early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, John B's gotten injury luck all year, so you have to wonder. I mean, I love Allen Robinson, but I mean, it's really hard to draft him because of his injury issues. And then Edelman obviously has been, pretty durable, but you never know. And then, Amari Cooper is, I don't know, that's I'm surprised he's held up so well. So You do wonder, maybe John B's team is just prone to a breakdown
here.
Yeah. Edelman, the 33-year-old slot wide receiver, it's amazing what he's been able to do this year. I think one of the guys that I get drawn to here in this matchup is actually my boy Chris Godwin, and I've been on the Godwin is better than Evans train all year long. And one of the things that Brandon, you've said is that, Evans draws the number one cornerback usually, and Godwin really benefits from being the second fiddle there with who he draws for coverage. So it'll be really interesting to see with Godwin really stepping into that wide receiver one role, if he can flourish, or if your predictions are going to come true and he's going to struggle being the number one wide out there.
So I think he could struggle against primary coverage. The problem is that if you look at the next two matchups, it's Detroit and Houston, neither of which has a primary corner. So it's like, I don't think it's going to make a big difference. The top coverage isn't going to be that much better. I just think over the course of a season, if Godwin didn't have Mike Evans there, he wouldn't be open quite as often as he is, because he's often the slot guy against weaker coverage, those big slot receivers. You've seen it with Godwin and Thielen. I just think they get easier matchups on a whole, and he's the underneath target. Would be my greater concern for Godwin, and I still think he's in a smash play. He's a smash play this week because of volume. But what if Bruce Arians doesn't play him in the slot and plays more of like a Justin Watson in the slot? That Bruce Arians slot receiver, back to the days of Larry Fitzgerald, has always gotten high target volume. And I think it's, are they going to move Godwin outside? I think that would hurt him a little bit. But again, pure volume wise, it just seems like they have no one else to throw to who's consistent. So he's probably just going to succeed in an inefficient way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I probably just have PTSD from Chris Godwin putting up like 50 against me in the last game I played with John B. But if I was a defensive coordinator, I'm just doubling him all game. I don't care what the rest of the offense is doing. I'm taking him out of the game.
Oh, exactly. That was my concern with them. And like before, it's like, if you're going to double anyone, you were doubling Evans because he's the guy who's going to beat you over the top. And you were like, okay, Godwin can get these easy 15-yard routes. And I think he's been benefiting from that all year. But I think that's pretty much what we have in this matchup. I won't ask for predictions of our matchup, Krieger, just because we're both in it. But I think all three of us may as well throw our prediction here. I think given the whole, and I hate to do it to John B., I think his title defense run ends today. I think Jason is currently, despite his quarterback position, I think he's the best current team in the league. And I just think John B., to your point, he's had a lot of injury luck this season, but he's rolling out Cooper, who I don't think is quite 100%. And, Cook has sort of slowed down as well with his shoulder injury. I just think that Jason has the more consistent and explosive team, and I actually have Jason as a title favorite at the moment.
Yeah,
John, after you.
I'll second that. I think it comes down to you versus Jason in the finals. I just think John B's team, although it's been really consistent all year, I don't think it has quite the upside at this point with the injuries and the guys getting banged up. And I don't know. I think next week you're really going to have to. This is going to have to be a vintage coaching performance from Mr. Brandon DeFreitas in order to win another title.
I'll see what I can do if I get there. Alex, predictions?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here. I'm gonna pick John B. And the reason why I'm gonna pick John B. is I think that his trade for Pat Mahomes ends up coming to fruition here for why he ended up doing it. I think Godwin's gonna have a good game. Obviously, John kind of needs some of these things to happen. But on the flip side, I think Jason's team is finally going to come down to earth. And part of the reason, admittedly, that I'm making this prediction is Jason beat me 3 times this year. He beat me twice in the divisional, and he booted my ass out of the league in the wild card round here in the playoffs. So, a little bit of why where I'm going to be cheering here. The back-to-back championships is really, really hard. I think Chris Burns, RIP from the league, is the only one to have done it. It's just, you have a 1 out of 12 chance, and it's really hard to repeat. So that'll be a cool storyline for John to make it through. But I think for Jason's team, I think the Chargers are going to come back down to earth against that matchup against the Vikings. And I think he's not going to get 40 points from Gordon and Eckler. And, maybe he starts the wrong quarterback here and Baker Mayfield. And, so I'm going JB.
All right. Well, big matchups. We'll be watching it all day. Krieger, good luck to you, and hopefully,
right back at you.
hopefully whoever advances from us can do a vintage coaching performance and get our groove back against what in either way it's going to be a tough matchup for us.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining. We'll be on next week. Hopefully we can do and I'd be, thrilled to have, either or both of you guys to join that to preview the championship game next week. But until then, good luck in our matchups, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks for having me. I'll get the popcorn ready.
All right. We'll catch you guys later.
Take care.